Production rules should check all input parameters for validity. There are multiple policy components that should be present in every production rule. We have already looked at the creation of a log file. A second standard component is the verification of input parameters. Input parameters are used to generalize rules by allowing the user to specify which persistent state information attributes, such as collection, files, resources, users, or zones, will be used. If an invalid input parameter is specified, the rule should fail. At a minimum, every input variable should be checked to make certain it represents a valid entity that maps to an existing persistent state attribute. The policy functions provided in the rule-based dfc-functions.re include functions to verify the existence of the entities defined by input parameters. These include file names. The policy functions are check file input and isData. Collection names, checked with check call input and isCall. Path names, using check path input. User names, using check user input. Metadata, using check meta exists call. Resources, using check resource input. And zones, using check zone input. Each function takes the name provided by the input variable and verifies that the name is a valid object. The functions with a name starting with check fail if the object does not exist. The isData and isCall functions return a status flag instead of failing and are typically used to check whether a file or collection already exists before creating a new file or collection. The policy function to check for the existence of a file is normally called before the body of a rule is submitted for delayed or periodic execution. This is an important step to minimize problems with queued rules. The check file input policy function is shown here. A query is made that counts the number of data IDs that exist for a specified file name. If the result is 0, the file does not exist and the rule fails. A failure message is written to standard out to warn the user. This test does not limit the search to files in a specific collection. If a specific file is required in a specific collection, the check path input policy function should be used. The policy function to check for the existence of a collection is similar. The check call input policy function is shown here. A query is made to count the number of call IDs that exist for the specified collection name. If the result is 0, the collection does not exist and the rule fails. A failure message is sent to standard out to warn the user. The policy function to check for the existence of a username is shown here. The policy function has two input parameters, the username and the home zone name for the user. The process is more involved as a user is specified by the account name and the name of their home data grid or zone. If the user's home account is in the data grid in which the check is running, a simple query can be made to count the number of user IDs that exist for the username. If the result is 0, the user does not exist and the function fails with an error message. To test whether the account is for a foreign user, home zone in another data grid, the input zone name is used to locate the host of the zone. If the user is accessing the data grid from a remote zone, a connection is made to the remote zone using the remote microservice. A query is issued in the remote zone to count the number of user IDs that exist for the combination of the username and user zone. If the result is 0, the user does not exist and the check fails. A warning message is written to standard out to warn the user. Take 7 minutes to complete exercise 51. Write a rule that checks an input parameter for a collection name. How is the rule modified if a relative collection path is input? See the example in Chapter 4.9 of the Policy Examples Workbook. Please load your rule file into the Lifetime Library in the sub-collection class INLS 624 by the end of today's class.